Okay, perfect. So now that the admin is out of the way, we can get the workshop started. Okay, so today I'll take you through a few things. We'll start off with when to conduct a qualitative study. We will also look at what the qualitative research process as a whole entails. We'll look at when to choose an appropriate research approach, and then a tentative overview of the qualitative data collection, an overview of sampling techniques, qualitative sampling techniques, and an overview of qualitative data analysis. Towards the end, we will also look at the quality assurance within qualitative research, and that is, in a nutshell, the credibility, the transferability, and the dependability of the research as a whole. Before we continue, don't forget to send your name, student number, degree level, and faculty in the chat box. Thank you to those who have so far. Right, let's move on. So just quickly in the chat box, let me know how familiar you are with qualitative research or qualitative data collection or anything qualitative related. Are you completely new to this? You have some basic knowledge, you've done it before, you already have a good foundation and you're just here for a bit of a refresher, or you are a total expert and you're going to help me run this workshop. Completely new. Polina says she has some basic knowledge. Thank you. I have some basic knowledge. Okay, that's good. My first time with current research. Okay, thank you. A good foundation. Okay, you've been using it. Okay. Anyone else? Okay, I take it that's everyone. Okay, so now I know more or less who is present in the class or in the session, and where your expert levels are at. Hopefully the rest of the session will contribute to what you already know. And if you need a refresher, it will spark your memory. And if you are completely new to this, I hope you learn as much as you can. So when to conduct the qualitative study? Usually you do qualitative studies when you want to explore something. If someone entered our class. If you have just entered, please send your name, student number, degree level, and faculty into the chat box, please. Okay. So usually when we want to conduct a qualitative study, we do this when we want to explore something, when we want to explain a behavior, or we want to describe an issue, or we want to understand behavior or phenomena or case, or when we are collecting other people's stories and retelling them to address a specific research question. So in a nutshell, that is when you want to conduct qualitative research. On the other hand, quantitative research is more to do with when we want to summarize things into stats. We want a more holistic numerical data to tell us, to speak to us rather. But with qualitative, this is more when you want to explore a phenomenon or any complex issues, or try to explain them or describe them, like I said before. So the qualitative research process most commonly starts when we identify a gap in the literature. So this immediately becomes our problem statement. So here we will say, okay, so much research focuses on this Western context in this particular field or topic, and nothing is really said or mentioned or researched in the non-Western context, and that immediately becomes our problem statement. Or you can maybe go the route of saying that this particular topic is under research. There's no information on it within the South African context. Here you justify as you see fit for your specific research. Then we go on to stage 2, or what level 2, or the next, and this is our research purpose. So here you try to within your proposal, you try to explain or describe the purpose of this research. And here you also conceptualize it. So why are you doing this particular research? Explain the different concepts that are involved. Let's use an example. So say you're looking at medication and ADHD and adults, then you would need to explain the background of ADHD, the background of medication within that context, and the background of adults with ADHD. So all the different components to that particular problem statement or topic, you would then need to expand on when you explain the reason behind this research being conducted. Your research question, this is normally our topic or the main thing that goes right on top on the first page. This is most commonly exploratory in nature. So it's something that you want to unpack. So it's a big question that you're trying to answer in a nutshell. And then you're breaking it down further in your research proposal. Then we move on to your research design. So here, this is basically just a logical description of how you plan to collect your data, how you plan to analyze this data, and how you plan to use that data that was collected and analyzed to answer your research questions. I see we have a question. Oh no, thank you, Ethan. So in your research design, this is usually your chapter, in your proposal, it's your chapter 3, I think. Yeah, it also depending on your faculty, and this is where you outline your plan on how you're going to answer this research question that you set out in the beginning. Then we move on, and here you have to discuss or explain your research approach, your sampling strategy, and this we will cover in the session, and your data collection strategy that you plan to use for your particular study. So remember, it's different for every different study. You need to choose a sampling or a data collection strategy or data analysis strategy that is suitable for your particular research. I can give you the options, and you would then need to conceptualize with your supervisor and see where and how it fits best for your study. It's not a blueprint where you just copy and paste and say, okay, this is what I'm going to do. You actually need to sit and conceptualize how you're going to go about it and what strategy best suits your study. But there are many factors involved, but we will touch on that as we go along. And then also the philosophical assumptions or your paradigm. So in the social sciences, this is very important because we look at the ontology, and this is basically the reality, the current reality. We also look at the epistemology, and that's the knowledge that is out there. And we look at the axology, and that's the value that your research will contribute. This step or section is it's applicable to certain faculties or departments rather. It might not be applicable to your supervisor, or your supervisor might not feel like it is necessary for you to dive into this, but it's good to know and to understand. Yeah. Let's move on. Then we have stage 7. And this is where you need to reflect on, in the conceptualization phase, you need to reflect on your roles within this research, your background, your beliefs, your perspectives, and your biases as an individual. So how is that going to influence your research? Say, for example, let's use the ADHD example, and you are someone that's diagnosed with ADHD, you have been taking medication, and now you come across participants who say, no, but this never worked for me, but the medication worked for you. So now you try to impose your beliefs or your biases on the responses because you don't understand why, but this medication didn't work for me. Why are you going against it? So you need to reflect um, on your biases, and we call this reflexivity, which I think I'll cover later as well, where you need to be cognizant of where you stand as an individual and um, what information will emerge from the research. We also look at the analysis of the data. So there are different data analysis techniques for qualitative research. And then once again, here you need to choose one that is suitable for your research. And also it has to complement your end goal. So how are you going to answer those research questions and objectives that you set out right in the beginning when you get to the analysis stage? Then we look at the quality assurance, and this I'll also cover later, where you look at the credibility, the transferability, and the dependability of your research. And then the fun part is the presentation and the interpretation of your results. So when you complete the data collection, you complete the data analysis, and you are now gathering everything into one write-up for your supervisor, and you're interpreting the results that you collected during your data collection phase. So that's the last step before you eventually get to the submission and all the admin around that. But yeah. Okay, so the data collection process. During your conceptualization, you need to consider and identify who your participants are going to be and where they are situated. So if, for example, they are situated within hospitals, which hospitals are going to become your research sites? Why those particular hospitals? So you need to expand and justify and motivate as you go along. You might say that you're looking at nurses who are only based at Tygerberg Hospital, for example. Why only Tygerberg Hospital? You need to justify. How will you gain access to the nurses? You need to consider that as well. You can't just walk into the hospital and say, right, can I get someone from Ward 3? I want to interview you. That's not how it works. You need to go through the proper channels to gain access. You also have to determine the type of data that you want to collect. So is it going to be, we'll touch on this later, but documents or visual data or interview data, focus group data. Then once you have decided on that, you need to think of, okay, how am I going to create or, sorry, just give me a moment. Oops. Just give me 2 minutes. Sorry about that, I'm back. So once you decide on what type of data you want to collect, you have to think of, okay, how am I going to develop or create these data collection forms? Is it going to be in the form of an interview guide, a focus group guide, or etc. And then you also have to consider how you're going to administer this interview or questionnaire or survey or focus group to the participants, but in an ethical manner. So throughout the process, you always have to keep the ethics in mind. I don't dive into ethics in this workshop, but it's always at the back. You always have to keep it at the back of your mind. So even during the conceptualization phase, sorry, it has to be at the back of your mind. So ethics in terms of plagiarism, not copy and pasting another or stealing another idea. Ethics in terms of how you're going to administer um, your interview guide or your focus group guide. So it's all, you always have to keep it at the back of your mind. Yeah. Are there any questions at this point? I'm going to assume assume that the silence means there are no questions. Okay, so let's dive into sampling. So non-probability sampling techniques are very commonly used in qualitative research. And in this type of research here, your aim is not to test or test the hypothesis about a broader topic on a bigger population, but it's rather to develop an initial understanding of a small under-researched population, and that is what qualitative research is. When we want to test a hypothesis, that's usually our quantitative research. In non-probability sampling, individuals are selected based on a non-random criteria, and not every individual has a chance of being included in the study. This type of sampling method is easier, it's cheaper, but it also has a high risk of sampling bias. And we'll unpack that later, or in the next slide rather. And that means that the inferences that you make about the population are weaker than with probability sampling. And in this sense, your conclusions or your results can be a bit more limited with non-probability sampling. It's very sample specific. So like the nursing example, if your study focuses on nurses, you're only going to look for nurses. If a doctor comes along and he has free time, you unfortunately cannot interview him. And that's the where the bias comes in a bit, because your sampling technique or strategy is so focused. So if you use a non-probability sampling technique, you should still aim to make it as representative of the population as possible. So try not just to focus on interviewing nurses at Tygerberg Hospital, but try and broaden the scope and go to more hospitals, just so that when you do make conclusions, it can be conclusions based on most nurses or all nurses. If you're going to draw conclusions based on your study only conducted with nurses at one hospital, like I previously said, your conclusions are very limited, because you can only say, according to the nurses at Tygerberg Hospital, the kitchen is very dirty. Let's just go with that for an example. But you cannot say that all the nurses in South Africa say that the kitchens at the hospitals are dirty. You cannot make that assumption or conclusion or generalize it to all the hospitals or nurses in South Africa. So that's the difference between probability sampling and non-probability. But remember, we most commonly use non-probability in qualitative research. Let's move on. So there are more sampling techniques, but these four are the most commonly used ones in qualitative research. And the first one is convenience sampling, and it is what it says it is. So this is basically a sample that is convenient and very accessible to you as the researcher. So say you're a student at the University of the Western Cape, and you want to hear about first year student experiences about the first year modules. It's very convenient for you to conduct research at the university during your free time because you are a student, you are there. It's convenient for you. You don't have to travel anywhere else. The student or the population or the sample that you want to work with is there around you. It's just a matter of you going during your free time to the different huddles of students that are sitting on the grass and asking, are you guys first years? Can I ask you a few questions, etc., etc. Then we also have voluntary response sampling. So this is similar to the convenience sampling, but a voluntary response sample is mainly based on the ease of access. So instead of the researcher choosing participants and directly contacting them, people can volunteer themselves. So say, for example, you develop an online survey and you post it on social media, and whoever taps on it and opens the link, they can respond to the survey, and in that way you can collect data. Or you might even send it around on WhatsApp and ask people to share it, and whoever taps on it and opens up the link and answers the survey, that's how you continue to collect the responses or data. Then we have another very popular one. It's snowball sampling. I have a tip here, but I'll first explain this one and then I'll give you the tip. So if the population is hard to access, so say you're having trouble accessing these nurses, they're not responding, or for some reason you're having trouble accessing them. Snowballing can be used to recruit participants via other participants. So say, for example, you know at least one nurse at the hospital. And this is after you've gotten clearance and ethical clearance to conduct research at that hospital or with nurses. None of the other nurses are responding to you, but there's one nurse that is. So then you kindly ask her, can you please speak to or direct me to any other nurse in the building or that you've worked with, etc., etc., and ask them to direct you to another nurse. Then once you get directed to another nurse, that's where the snowballing effect comes into place, because now you can interview that nurse, and then when you're done with the interview, you can ask her, can you direct me to another nurse that would be interested in assisting me and my research. Then when you get to the third nurse that was referred to, or the second nurse, you continue that process on and on until you reach your sample size. The tip that I wanted to give you was, say, for example, in your proposal, when you, I see someone joined us. Would you kindly send your name, student number, and degree level and faculty in the chat box, please? This is only for registration or register purposes. Okay. So the tip was, in your proposal, right? When you making all these promises of what you're going to do or planning out what you want to do with your research, you might maybe say, okay, you're going to engage in purposeful or convenient sampling, right? Off the bat. However, if convenient or purposeful sampling does not yield the sampling, what's the word? Target, yeah. Then you're going to engage in snowball sampling. So outline it in your proposal that this is the plan. If plan A doesn't work, I'm going to engage in plan B, and that is sampling. Snowball sampling. It is perfectly fine to do that. I did that in my master's proposal, and it worked out in the end, because eventually I actually engaged in snowball sampling because it was so difficult to gain participants who were willing to participate in my study. We have something in the chat box. Okay, thank you. So then lastly, we have purposive or purposeful sampling. And this basically involves the researcher using the expertise to select a sample that is most useful to the purposes of the research study. So, like I said in the previous slide, here you are very picky about who you choose to engage in your research or as part of your sample. And this can sometimes be an advantage and a disadvantage to your research, but remember you deciding on what is best for your study. So here, when you as a researcher, you want to gain a detailed understanding or knowledge about a specific topic or something, rather than making statistical references or inferences about this topic. Or whether the population is very small and specific. So with purpose of sampling, it's very to the point. So you're looking for a very defined sample group, if that makes sense. Yeah. If there aren't any questions, we can move on. If Zoom allows me to. Okay, perfect. So the $1 million question is how much number of or how much participants is suitable for a qualitative sample. To be honest, I cannot give you that number right now. It really depends on your research and your proposed plan. But what you can do is justify for your number. So I know that some literature says that if you're going to conduct interviews, for example, you cannot to draw proper conclusions, you cannot have a sample less than 10. And then if you read more deeper into the literature, you'll find that some researchers or authors will say, actually, the number is 15. So you should try and aim for 15. What I can tell you today is you need to find an article that's going to justify for your number. So if you're going to say, I'm going to conduct qualitative interviews for my proposed study, and I will do this with a sample of 10. Find an article that's going to justify your number for your number 10. If you're going to say 15, find an article that justifies and supports your argument of 15. But once again, it really depends on your research approach that you decide to choose. So are you going to go with focus groups? What then you have to go and read a bit further. What does the literature say? What is a good number to have in your focus group, and use that as justification. If you're going to conduct interviews, you need to find literature that's going to back up, like I said, why you're only going to do 10 participant interviews. Once again, there are pros and cons to all of it. If the number is less than 10, I think you may not be able to. If you say, for example, your master's is done or your PhD is done, and you want to maybe draw up an article, concept paper on something that stood out or something that emerged from your research. You cannot, some publishers will kick it out if the sample is less than 10. It might not be like this for everyone or for every publishing house, but you have to also think about your end goal. So if you're planning to write an article after you finish this research, how is the decisions you make now going to influence what you want to do after this phase of your research? It also depends on the accessibility of the participants. So do you have access to a suitable number of participants? you also have to think of time and resources, and that's both your time and the participants' time. And resources in terms of how much money are you going to give out for traveling back and forth, etc., etc. And then you also have to think of saturation. So saturation basically refers to when, say, for example, you've conducted out of the 10 interviews, you conducted 8 so far, and you're noticing patterns. So everybody's saying the same thing. And you realize, okay, maybe it's not even necessary for the 9th and 10th interview, because you've already gotten to a point where there's no new information emerging from your participants. So you might decide to cut it off at 8 because you're justifying that no new information was emerging from your data collection. Yeah. Are there any questions around this or any previous slide? How does one achieve representativeness in their research when they are selecting a population? Okay, see, this presentation being available to us, attendees. Okay. So to Andile, yes, this will be made available to you guys, as well as the PowerPoint, as well as the recording will be made available to you. And then to answer Ethan, it's a pleasure. How does one achieve representativeness in their research when they're selecting a population? So Ethan, it really comes down to your just keep okay. It comes down to your research topic and your accessibility to the participants. So like my example of the nurses, if you're going to conduct a study with nurses about, let's use something realistic, about the experiences with treating infants. Let's just, leave it there, just for an example. If you're only going to, if you want to broaden your or create some sort of representativeness in your study, ideally you would then have to interview, let's say you're going to do interviews, we're just assuming here. Ideally, you would then need to interview nurses within the Western Cape, nurses within the Eastern Cape, nurses within every province in South Africa. Once you have that sample and you're analyzing the data, it would be better for you to draw conclusions and say, okay, based on the information gathered from this study and from the X amount of nurses in the study, we can conclude that nurses enjoy working with infants more than what they work with than adults or teenagers, etc., etc. Let's just assume, yeah. However, you have to be realistic. So you have to look at your time. Are you able to travel all over the country to interview nurses? You might even decide, hey, let's do online interviews. However, you have to consider the resources. Does the nurses have access to these online platforms to conduct the interviews rather? Do they have time based on the schedule? What else? You need to consider all those external factors that will come into play. Are you willing to take the gamble to see, okay, let's see how far I can get with the resources that I have, with the time that I have, with the resources that I have. It's always good to try and see how far you get. You never know. I wanted to add to that. But does my example make sense? Am I answering your question? you really have to sit back and assess. And this also has to occur in your conceptualization phase. So if you say you're going to conduct interviews, okay, yes, but what are the pros and the cons of conducting interviews? Would it be better to conduct a focus group instead? Because that way you can have one day allocated for all nurses to join online and for you to conduct this focus group. So that there's no back and forth and nurses maybe backing out last minute because they were called into work, family emergencies, etc., etc. You know, life happens. So you have to really weigh out your pros and cons when you make these decisions. Yes, it does. Thank you. It's a pleasure. I hope it really does and that you're not just saying so. Is it possible to combine focus group interviews and online questionnaire in data collection? Focus group interviews and online. So yes, it's very much possible. I know students have been doing it for a while, but just confirm with me, your focus group interviews, are these being done with the same group that will have to complete the online questionnaires? So is it two separate data collection techniques, but with the same group? No different groups. Okay, I see. I'm going to assume this is a PhD because this is most commonly seen in PhDs, where you will conduct maybe a survey with one group and a focus group with another group. Let me just check. Yes, it is. Oh, perfect. Okay, so yes, you're on the right track, and it is perfectly fine to combine data collection techniques, especially if the information from both techniques is going to help you answer your research questions that you set out right in the beginning. Ethan said, no, it really does, especially when explain the example of the nurse. Okay, perfect. I know the nurses is not a very universal example. It might apply more to science or CHS or other faculties, but you get the holistic picture. If we were to apply that with any other group, you still need to consider the same pros and cons, you know? If that's it for now, we can move on. Okay, perfect. We'll move on. How will you gain access to the people and your sites? So we kind of touched on this when we spoke about our nursing example. But here you have to go through different channels or different levels, if you want to call it levels. If you're going to work with teachers, for example, you have to gain permission from the Department of Education. Even if your sister, your mommy, your brother, your neighbor is a teacher and you want to say, okay, I'm just quickly going to run around and go interview the neighbor. Unfortunately, you cannot do that. You have to gain access from or permission from the Department of Education if your sample is teachers. The same goes to any healthcare workers, whether it's nurses, doctors, you name it. You have to gain permission from the Department of Health. If you wanted to conduct research and your sample is the university students at UWC and you use convenient sampling because it's convenient for you, you have to gain permission from the institutional review board. So wherever you go, where your sample most commonly comes from, there's most likely an organization or a site or someone that you need to gain permission from in order to conduct that research. Also, once again, remember I said I'm not going to focus on ethics, but the ethics always follows us wherever we go throughout this process. And once again, before we can even interview our nurses or our teachers or our parents or whoever your sample is, you have to, your project or your proposal needs to gain ethical clearance before you can even dive in further into your research process. Yeah, does that make sense? If you have just joined us, please send your name, student number, degree level, and faculty into the chat box. Thank you so much. Let's move on. Okay, so there are several strategies that might prove useful when negotiating qualitative research through the IRBS. I'm not sure if I introduced the IRBS properly, but let's go back. So the IRBS is basically the Institutional Review Board. That's what IRBS stands for. And this board basically ensures that the data reported is credible and accurate, and that the participants' rights and confidentiality are protected. So they look out for the well-being of the participants in your study, and that the procedures, remember those procedures in the beginning that you need to plan out when you're writing up your proposal, that everything that you're outlining here is ethical and credible, if that makes sense. So when you are completing your proposal, you might want to take into consideration all these steps that I'm going to mention now when you submit your proposal to the institutional board. So if you can try and determine if the individuals that are reviewing your proposal are familiar with qualitative research. Same goes for if your study was a quantitative study. Try and determine if they are familiar with quantitative research, because what you'll find is they'll send it back with comments and adjustments, but this might be unnecessary if they don't know that, okay, this is how things are actually done in qualitative research, and this is how it's done differently in quantitative research. So they might be giving you quantitative advice for qualitative study. That makes sense. So if you can, try and just determine what in most cases they should actually have some background or be familiar with the different types of research. Try and develop detailed descriptions of your procedures so that those reviews have full disclosure of the potential risks that your study might have to participants and to the sites that you plan to conduct the research at. So be as descriptive as possible. This is also to save time and avoid them sending it back and you having to elaborate more and then sending it back. And this might take forever for you to get your ethical clearance. And some of us might be fighting against time. Time might not be on our side. Or even if it's not about time, try and be as detailed as possible so they can see what your plan is. And remember, you're not there to fend for yourself. So whatever you write in the proposal, they're reading as you speaking to them. Okay, this is what I plan to do, and this is how I plan to do it. And this is X, Y, and Z in the literature that justifies my plan. Easy. Try and detail ways you will protect your participants' anonymity. This is important. Once again, I said I wasn't going to focus on ethics, but watch how the ethics always follows us. So you need to protect your participants at all times throughout the research process. When you're speaking about them in your proposal, when you're actually conducting the interview, focus group, etc., with them, and even at the end, when you're busy with your write-up, you might outline in your proposal that you're going to give your participants pseudonyms, or you're going to call them A, B, and C, or X, Y, and Z, or 1, 2, and 3, so that the identity is not identifiable to someone else who might be reading this and saying, hey, but isn't Ethan my neighbor? I know this guy. So instead of naming your participant Ethan, name them participant E, because that could be anyone, you know. Try to also discuss the need to respect the research site and to not disturb the site or not disrupt or disrupt as little as possible. So for example, if you're going to the hospital to conduct interviews with nurses, don't go, okay, I can't say don't go at the wrong time, but if you see the nurses are needed, step back and let them do what they need to do. And not prioritize your interview over them helping a patient. So something small like that. Also try to detail how the study will provide opportunities to give back to the community or to the individuals who will be part of your study. A nice thing for you to do as a researcher is to share your work, your final work, not before it was sent to ethics, but or for marking at the end when it's after your graduation, maybe share your completed completed PhD, your master's research that was uploaded to the library. Share that with your participants so that they can see what they were part of. And if your study promises to contribute towards an intervention for participants, outline that as well. That's very important information for the IBR, sorry. And then also try to acknowledge that during your interaction with participants, you will adopt their beliefs and even become advocates for their ideas. So here you also need to practice your reflexivity, practice that biases, or rather be conscious of your biases and your beliefs. Like we mentioned in the previous slide, I think it was right at the beginning. Practice your roles as a researcher. Practice your back or be conscious of your background and your beliefs and your biases when you are out in the field collecting data. Yeah, let's move on. Okay, and then also try and specify the potential power imbalances that may occur between you as the researcher and your participants. And how will you address these imbalances? So say, for example, you're a lawyer or you are a PhD student. If you walk into the room and your participant is someone from the community, the moment they know that, okay, this is a PhD student, or oh no, this is a lawyer, I'm going to, they might fabricate the answers in a certain way to try and impress you, but it's for you to, that's not what you want at the end of the day. So you have to disclose any imbalances that there might be, or it might be that they might know you from somewhere. Let's say your dad is a minister and they know your dad's a minister. So when you're conducting the interviews, they're always going to keep that at the back of their mind, that they don't want to say anything wrong because, hey, this is a child or someone very important. So something similar or something along those lines. If you can think about it beforehand, try and disclose it in your proposal beforehand. If there aren't any power imbalances, then you can just state as simple as there are no predetermined or power imbalances that you as the researcher can think of. But if they do arise as the research unfolds, you will unpack that in your results and your write-up. So something simple as that. Try and detail how much time you will spend at each site. So this also gives the IBR an idea of how long you will be in the field collecting data. And also try and include the project description in your project description, rather, in your proposal, a list of the interview questions And that is if you are doing interviews. Remember, if you are doing interviews, this can be unpacked more. So are you doing structured interviews, semi-structured interviews, open-ended interviews? Is it going to be an online interview, in-person interview, one-on-one interview? If you're conducting focus groups, you need to include a list of your focus group questions. Then you also need to unpack, is this going to be an online focus group, an in-person focus group? So each section or decision here in your proposal needs to be unpacked and justified. I did do a workshop on interviews. I believe you will find it on Canva. We did it a while ago in the month of May, I think. So if you want to look at that before you dive a bit further into your proposal, you can go and listen to the recording. The slides are available in Canva. So that will also help you if you are conducting interviews. I do believe I speak a bit towards focus groups as well. So that information is available for you on Canva. Are there any questions? Okay, I take the silence as no questions. So let's move on to your data collection methods or your approach that you would possibly use in qualitative research. So the most common two are interviews and focus groups. We also have observations, documents, and audiovisual material. So observations is basically you going into the field and gathering data by observing people, either at the research site or in their natural site. So if you, once again, let's go back to our nurses, wanted to observe the daily duties of a nurse, then after you have gained permission, you would go to the hospital, go to their ward, and just observe a nurse for the day. And here you will just sit in the background, make notes. You might make notes of body language, tone of voice, when each or different thing occurred, how it occurred, why, but all through observation. So no talking, no introduction. Okay, maybe introduction the first time that you get there, but after that you will just have to pretend as if you are invisible in the background, and make observations or make notes of your observations rather. So remember, each of these data collection approaches all have their pros and their cons. It is up to you as the researcher to choose the best data collection method for your particular study. You need to decide on whether this approach will work for you or not, or whether the pros outweigh the cons, etc. Then our popular one, we all know what interviews are. It's a qualitative technique where we conduct one-on-one interviews with or either one-on-one interviews or with a small number of participants. And this we do to explore the experiences or the perspectives on a particular topic. And then we have our focus groups, and this is very similar to our interviews, but it's just done with a small number of participants at the same time. So according to literature, most commonly this number of participants are either range between 6 or 8 at a time. So if you have 12 participants, you might outline it in your proposal that you're going to have 2 focus group sessions with 6 people each at 2 separate occasions. because your overall sample is 12 individuals. And this is normally done so that you don't want to overcrowd the room. You don't want people, you want each one to have a chance to voice the perspectives and the ideas and the experiences. You don't want someone to hold back because they didn't have an opportunity to talk because there was so much people in the room at the same time. So you need to consider all of that. But then also at the same time, like I said, with observations and interviews, you need to weigh your pros and cons on whether you will use this data collection approach or not. Because focus groups are a bit unpredictable, and you can go there with an outlined focus group guide, but because it's very open-ended and participants' experiences are so different, you might find yourself moving away from what you plan to ask, and this might take the discussion elsewhere and not where you wanted to go. But once again, you need to weigh the pros and cons. And then we have documents and audiovisual material. So documents consist of private or public records about a particular site or people or study that you want to analyze. And this can include minutes of a meeting, journals, letters, newspapers, etc. What's not the pros about or the cons, if pros and cons here is also something you need to weigh when you decide on what to do. Because what's nice here is there is no sampling, there is no admin around participants, etc. Because the data is already there. It's just a matter of you analyzing it. However, you need to consider whether you will be whether gaining access to those documents, whether you'll be allowed access to those documents rather, especially if it is private records maybe. And if you're going to use journals and letters, can you figure out their handwriting? Can you figure out what they are saying? Is it clear what the participant or the person who wrote this journal or this letter, is it clear what they're saying? Can you see if it's something old that was written years ago? Has it faded? So those types of things. And then when we get to audiovisual materials, and this is basically just pictures. So you're analyzing pictures or sounds that was previously collected by other researchers in order to understand the topic or a phenomena, etc. So yeah. And then we have types of data analysis in research, qualitative research. Before we move on to this, is there anyone that has any questions about the data collection approaches? What I possibly can add here is that you are able to have more than one, especially with your PhD proposals. Not so much masters and honors, but I know with PhD proposals you are able to combine maybe focus groups and interviews or documents and audiovisual material, etc. Okay, is everyone still with me? I think we've been in it for about an hour now. If you just want to give a thumbs up. Or you can say yes in the chat box. Okay, I'm going to assume everyone is still here and that my voice has not made you catch a nap. Okay, let's move on to the types of analysis. So we have six most commonly used techniques in qualitative research, and that's thematic analysis. This is a very popular one. Grounded analysis, narrative analysis, content analysis, discourse analysis, also a very popular one. And then the phenomenological analysis, or phenomenology. It's a long word. I always just refer to it as the IPA approach. And that's the interpretive phenomenological approach. Yeah. So in a nutshell, content analysis. Oh, okay, before we go there, the data analysis comes into play when you have completed your proposal, sent it for ethical clearance, gotten your permission from your research sites, you collected your data, and now you are ready to analyze your data. But you first need to outline what type of analysis technique you're going to use on your particular data. So the first one is content analysis. So here you try to determine the presence of certain words or concepts or themes that are within the data set that you're working with. So say, for example, you as the researcher, you want to evaluate the language that is used within a newspaper article. And by doing this, you're searching for biases within that article. That's if that is your type of data collection. So maybe you're working with newspaper articles, you might want to do a content analysis. You can also still do a content analysis if you want to analyze interviews or focus groups. It's entirely up to you. Once again, you're going to have to just justify as to why you are combining this analysis technique with the rest of what you have decided in your proposal. Then we have narrative analysis, and this is basically analyzing, you as a researcher, analyzing how stories are being told. And then we have discourse analysis, and here you are analyzing different conversations and interactions. This pays well with observations when you are doing observations as data collection. Then thematic analysis. Here you are identifying themes and patterns within your data set. So what are the most common, what's the pattern that you see across the 10 interviews, for example? Or what themes do you see emerging from the 10 interviews? Yeah. And then we have grounded analysis. And this is basically starting from scratch with a specific question and then using the data alone to build a theory in response to that initial question that you set out in the beginning. And then we have the IPA, and this basically allows you to understand people's unique experiences within a phenomenon. This is also nicely paired with documents. So if you're looking at personal journals or letters, you might want to use IPA to analyze the experiences of people who have written these letters or journals, etc. And then just a note or a tip for you at the bottom. All 6 of these can be used both with primary and secondary data. So just to let you know that primary data is data that you collected. So this can be your interviews, your focus groups, or your observations. Your secondary data is data that was already collected. You just gaining permission to use that data, and that's your documents and your audiovisual materials. So these 6 can be used across both primary and secondary data. And then the last slide, well, the second last slide, but the last topic for today is establishing trustworthiness. So I said I wasn't going to focus on ethics, but you will see how it follows us from the beginning of through your conceptualization all the way to the end, during your data collection, data analysis, your write-up, and at the very end when you are finally done. So in order to ensure a trustworthiness within your research, we always follow Lincoln and Gruber's criteria. And the first one here, like I said in the beginning, is your credibility. And this is with reference to your internal validity of your your research. So this basically refers to the confidence in the truth of the findings based on the research design and your participants and the context in which this data was collected. Then we also have the second one is our transferability, and this is in reference to your external validity or your generalizability. So is this research that you conducted applicable to other contexts? Can we generalize our example about the nurses' experiences to all nurses in South Africa? Or is that only the nurses' experiences in Cape Town or in Western Cape or in Tygerberg Hospital specifically? Then we have our dependability, and this is in reference to our reliability. So is the consistency and replicability of the findings within the same subjects or in a similar context. So basically, if another researcher or another student wanted to conduct the same research or the same topic in a different context, will they come to similar conclusions? If your research is dependable, then it means yes, they will come to similar conclusions. Not the same, remember, because it's different context. So the results will be similar, but the results will never be the same. And then confirmability, and this is in reference to your objectivity. So you as the researcher, of your degree of neurality or the extent to which the findings of your study is shaped by your participants' responses and not your biases and your interests and your motivation. Yeah. And then here are some strategies to ensure your trustworthiness throughout your study. So to ensure credibility throughout your study, you can engage in prolonged engagement with your participants, peer briefing, triangulation, or member checking. So the others are self-explanatory, but member checking refers to going back to your participants and checking whether the notes that you have made or the conclusions that you have drawn is accurate and aligns with what they have expressed to you or experienced. And in triangulation, this is basically the use of multiple methods or data sources in qualitative research to develop a holistic or comprehensive understanding of your particular study. To ensure transferability of your research, you can engage in purposeful sampling or provide a thick description. And then in order to ensure dependability, you can engage in or create an audit trail, or once again engage in triangulation. So an audit trail is basically a transparent description of the research steps that you have taken from the start, you as a researcher has taken from the start of your research project to develop and to the development and the reporting of your findings. So basically, keeping a journal of everything you have done and decided on from the beginning all the way to the end until you have completed your reporting on your findings. And then in order to ensure confirmability, you can also once again engage in triangulation or practice reflexivity. And I mentioned this right at the beginning, somewhere in the middle, and now again, you as the researcher, you need to be cognizant of your personal biases, your personal experiences, your personal, here's another one, perceptions, and your background as a researcher, and not let that infringe on your research throughout the process. I think that is all from me today. I hope those that said they are new to this, that you have learned something, and those that said they have some understanding, I hope that your knowledge was refreshed, and then you maybe learned something new here or there. And to those who are quite familiar with qualitative research, I hope this was a good refresher to you guys. I'm going to ask you, you are welcome to unmute, send any questions, send it in the chat, unmute yourself. I'm going to ask you to complete the workshop evaluation, if you don't mind. And then I'll also stop the recording before I do that.